Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Boys and girls, it is time to embrace the strange, but in the most oddly accessible way possible. And you know what? If you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more, in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. Subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a like, give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're pretty much everywhere, like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the TikTok, and we're on the Letterboxd for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because, you know, if we love to write about it and talk about it and watch it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, pay us a visit. On this episode, we are delving into the weird, into the wild, but into the really, really good and the really, really kind of psychologically fascinating as well, as we are talking a little bit of Infinity Pool. We know it's been in theaters now, but it is also now available on video on demand from our friends over at Elevation Pictures, and we had the unique pleasure of sitting down and talking with the writer and director of this film, Brandon Cronenberg. And I mean, it's really a story that shows how hedonistic and how really we can abandon our moral code and our moral system when, you know, we're at a beautiful sunny resort and things, but this just ramps it up to about 47, really. I mean, think as bent as the White Lotus is, imagine the White Lotus on acid, and I mean, and that kind of takes you to what Infinity Pool is all about. Like I said, it is available on video on demand platforms now, like Apple and Amazon and places like that. So if you haven't already had a chance to check out the film, I do recommend you do that as well. But first, enjoy our talk with writer-director Brandon Cronenberg, because between you and me, it's a pretty good one. All right, well, Brandon, obviously, first off, man, just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Now, I mean, congrats on the movie, man. It's a hell of a piece of work. I mean, I guess my first question is, like, walk me through sort of the origin of the story on your end.
So it started as a short story that I was working on, I think in 2014, 2013, maybe. And the original concept for the story was essentially just the first execution in the film. So it's someone at an execution in this fictional country. They're watching a double of themselves being executed, and so it was sort of about that, personal identity and punishment, and it was mainly focused on that. As I eventually expanded it into a feature, and it was also a short comic in an anthology comic at one point. That's when I introduced the resort setting, because that seemed like the right setting for a story about people operating without conventional consequences.
Right. No, I mean, I guess walk me through casting, because I mean, obviously Alexander is just fantastic, and I mean, this almost feels like the sort of the anti-Northman as he sort of melts into the background opposite Mia.
Yeah, I mean, Alex is an incredibly interesting contrast for a director. I mean, he's a brilliant actor. First of all, he can do all the nuanced dramatic stuff that he needs to do. He's good. In general, he's incredibly talented, but he's very interesting also because on the one hand, he has the presence and the look and the charisma to play a traditional Hollywood leading character. Like he can do the leading man thing, and he has. But on the other hand, he's way more interesting than that, and he loves to go to these incredibly twisted places, and he has the capacity to do that as well as an actor. He can be beautiful and ugly, and he likes to be ugly, and he likes to really embrace the sort of madness. And so for the film, that's perfect because he can start by looking like he stepped out of a resort brochure, but then gradually contort himself into this kind of animalistic abandon.
I love that the film kind of plays with a bit of a gender reversal, whereas like it really feels like many of the female characters are a lot more dominant, and the male characters definitely sort of, I mean, I don't want to say subservient, but are definitely not the alphas probably in this scenario. Was that sort of key for you in sort of playing with that dynamic?
I mean, I definitely enjoyed that dynamic in the story. I mean, and again, that with Alex, that creates a more fun contrast because it's sort of not what you expect from him, but he can do that stuff very well. It was probably more particular to the characters than a kind of blanket approach to gender, but it's more interesting to me certainly than just having a bunch of alpha guys.
For sure, right. Now, I mean, something else that stood out for me was just sort of the color scheme and sort of the visual look of the film. I mean, there's in particular sort of when they went into the house with the masks, which obviously was very dark, but you could still see the color and the richness of the masks, but also that scene sort of by the pool with Alex and Mia where it's like black and there's the blue and there's really sort of this transformative sense of color that's kind of taking us into a different universe. How big was it for you to sort of play with the visual texture of the film to really kind of transport us into something different?
It was huge. I mean, I spent many hours and days with my cinematographer Kareem Hussein working out the visual language of the film, both this more hallucinatory stuff, which obviously a bit more experimental for us. That's all practical in-camera effects, and so that there's no CGI in those hallucination sequences. But also just the look and tone dramatically, and how to sort of pair this more naturalistic stuff with a kind of more dream world, dream logic approach. Some of it was decided in advance. Some of it was built out as we found the locations and figured out what would work for different settings.
For sure. Now, I mean, there's something about just the like there's really a beauty in the simplicity of the idea of how we almost abandon our morals when we're somewhere else. And to me, from someone who has grown up watching horror movies and thrillers, it's much more terrifying for me when something is playing in my head. Like it's more about the idea than sort of the visceral thing that's happening on screen. For you as a storyteller, how much do you like leaning into sort of the idea of something that gets people talking and sort of frightened about it, rather than just sort of giving them the spectacle of something on screen?
I like both, to be honest. I mean, the to start with something conceptually frightening and interesting is important. That's sort of where my head is when I'm writing. That's I like to try to find an angle that's at least interesting to me, that isn't just a retread of what I've seen before. When it comes to actually showing it, it depends. I'm not really trying to shock people just for the sake of shocking them. Right. There's a tradition of filmmaking that's just that, and I like those films, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's also only so interesting to me. Generally speaking, the more graphic scenes are narrative and driven by character. In this case, so much of the contrast is between that banal resort setting and these people who are essentially, at least to begin with, banal people, and then this kind of animalistic violence and carnality that surfaces in this environment. And so to me, to really feel that contrast, you need to take the audience there, and you need to give them a visceral sense of that, because that then shapes their perspective on the next scene. If you've just shown an orgy, then you show the morning after, you're feeling it in a way that you aren't if you imply an orgy.
Right.
And so I think that's important, especially for this, because the narrative is driven primarily by this character evolution. It's a narrative film, but it's not a very plotty film. It's very much about the psychological evolution. And so
for sure. No, I mean, I'm curious because, I mean, obviously you're in this great location, and I mean, you're the director, you're leading the ship. How do you keep sort of everyone on point when you're sort of filming in this beautiful place?
Well, I mean, everyone is a professional, and the place is beautiful, but the schedule is very much an indie filmmaking schedule. And so I think, first of all, it was a very weird place. It is beautiful physically, but it was also a very, very strange location to shoot at. So it wasn't exactly a conventional vacation. I think there was a kind of camaraderie built during the point when we were staying in Croatia. It was half in Budapest, but half in this resort in Croatia. There was definitely a strange mirroring of our experiences as a crew and what we were shooting in the film, which was a bit surreal. But I mean, from my perspective, it was a very hectic indie schedule. I mean, we were trying to do a lot given our time and resources, and everybody was very gracious. The cast were incredibly gracious and lovely about that, and they really were on board. So there was no problem focusing.
Now, I mean, I've got to ask, because speaking of a hectic schedule, like Sundance was not that long ago. And I mean, you've been there, you've been here, you've been back again. Now that we're probably at the moment where you can at least start to take a breath. Like, have you been able to process sort of audience reactions and sort of the feedback you've been getting on the film so far?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yes. The smoke hasn't totally cleared, and we're about to go to Berlin and do the European side of it. So, but honestly, the reaction has been great. I mean, I sat through it with the audience at Sundance. It was a really warm crowd, and for a film like this, especially to be getting the kind of positive reviews we've been getting, and to be making some money weirdly is for me always a surprise. I always assume everyone is going to absolutely hate my films, and so if anyone's on board, that seems like a huge victory to me.
Well, I mean that must be the initial reaction, right? When people are calling this probably your most accessible film, you're really going, "Did I do something wrong?"
Yeah, that was a surprise to me.
No, I mean, I'm curious because I mean, obviously, and I mean, I love the comparison, although it is a little hackneyed. Like when you see a show like White Lotus compared to this, how do you sort of feel like the nature of sort of our loss of humanity when we have that opportunity to lose it sort of plays out in sort of narrative storytelling? Because I mean, it's one of those things where to me it's terrifying, but it's also completely relatable all at the same time.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how it relates to White Lotus exactly. I mean, maybe it's sort of two questions. There is an interesting wave of rich vacation or satire that's hitting right now. A lot of it's set on resorts. Triangle of Sadness has been mentioned as well. So has Glass Onion actually, and it would
rich people doing rich people shit, basically. But yeah.
That's all. I mean, that's all interesting. Although it was totally by accident in my case, because the film development moves at such a glacial pace.
Of course, right.
Working on this for so many years, so it's interesting to see all this stuff hit at once. But to me, it feels more like you get two asteroid apocalypse movies in the same year for some reason, and it's hard to know why, but that's just the way it is. I think the other question is interesting because on the one hand, these movies and White Lotus are of course skewering rich vacationers, and that's part of the satire. But there is an element of ordinary people becoming monstrous when given the opportunity, which I think is just the reality. I mean, history is full of ordinary people doing the most atrocious things when they're given the chance. I don't generally believe that we have a kind of innate nature and that we have to be one thing. I think human beings are very plastic, but there are trends, and one of the trends is that given the opportunity, we are violent animals often, and we often will do horrible things. So I think it's wrong to assume that in a position of power and freedom that any one of us would necessarily be good. We imagine ourselves to be good, ethical people, but evidence shows that might not be the case.
No, you're absolutely right, man. But I mean, again, just thank you so much for the time today, man, and congrats on the work.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, much appreciated.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.